When we first came to Yerevan as a family, it was all the way back during the time the USSR was collapsing, the late 80s, early 90s. I was a kid back then, and the most vivid memory I have of that time, and I still get it whenever I enter an old building that's not been renovated, there's a kind of smell. And to me, that's a smell of old wood and stale cigarettes. And I don't know why that stayed with me in all these years. But fast forward another decade or so, and we came here to live. It was the early 2000s. And Yerevan was, well, it was a small town. We lived in New Delhi, India before that, and that's just a giant city with maybe 10 or 12 or 15 million people, unending in all directions. Yerevan is something like a million people, and much more compact, and it has a pretty defined geography. And I've grown to appreciate that very much. It's set among hills and in a central valley, and that gives it a kind of character that I would say Delhi doesn't really have, or doesn't have in that sense. The people, that was the thing that stuck with me most. I was, 17, 18, conscious teenager, and I stood out. And at that time, in 2000, 2002, you could easily tell who was from here and who not, just by the way they looked, the way they dressed, the way they carried themselves. People here, they mostly wore black, and mostly wore black all the time. There was a lot more poverty, a lot more visible poverty then. And the outsiders were obvious outsiders. And I was not just an obvious outsider, but I had much lighter skin than most people. I'm Armenian, but I don't really look the part for the most part. And having long curly hair and having a beard, like these are strange things. And I remember being laughed at. I remember being purposely pointed out and being laughed at on the streets. And I found it funny that they found me funny at that time. But today, you cannot tell who is a local and who is not. You really can't just walking down the street, and that I find that encouraging. I like diversity. I like having different styles and different cultures and subcultures. And you still have those people who are black all the time. You have those people too, but you also have other people. Something else that is quite evident is language. So the way the city expresses itself, again, in the 90s and in the early 2000s, Russian was still quite prominent in Yerevan. It's still prominent, it's not that it's not, but English is also prominent, whether it's in terms of street signs or just names of businesses, like whatever, public signage. It's trilingual nowadays. It used to be much more bilingual. And just on the streets, you hear much more. You hear tourists from different places. So back in the early 2000s, the only tourists who ever came to Armenia were Armenians. Today you have all kinds of people from Europe, from the Americas, from the Middle East. And that Middle East part has become even more pronounced lately. Just in the past few years, you have, besides tourists from the Arab world or from Iran, you have a lot of Armenians who are moving here. From Iran, it's been a while, but from Syria, the past, I guess, 2, 3 years now, well, refugees. That's one word for them. Some of them are not, in fact, refugees. Some of them have moved here of their will. Some of them are kind of stuck in between. It's actually a bit of a sad story there. But seeing their presence in downtown Yerevan and hearing their language. So Armenia is supposed to be the homeland of all the Armenians, but the Armenians as a widespread people, they have great diversity among them, and linguistic diversity is one thing, and specifically what's called Western Armenian. The language of the Armenians of the Ottoman Empire never really has had a foothold here in Armenia. One might say until recently. It's still a minority of people who speak in Western Armenian within this country, but you hear it more and more on the streets because all these people have come from Aleppo and other cities. Yerevan has a real charm to it. I really like that. It has a real nice feel to it. It's like a small, I would even say European town with a lot of Eastern, typical Oriental influence. And just going out in the evening, having people walking around downtown, this whole sense of community is something I deeply appreciate. And that has not changed. That's what I like the most about Yerevan, about how you can just go out late into the night, midnight, 1 o'clock, and just walk the streets, this delightful streets downtown with its wide pavements and boulevards, and that's something I hope will stay the same.